This is the little hand crank generator I just made. I've been wanting to make a little hand crank generator for a while. I made this using a cheap Chinese gearhead motor. These are on eBay for like $8 or $7 shipped from China. This one's 60 RPM, 12 volt. And what I did is I used a M8 60mm bolt. I'll take this apart in a few minutes so you can see it. And then another M8 60mm bolt with some 608ZZ bearings as the handle. And then I have a little DC-DC converter that's a buck converter that can take up to 50 volts on the input. And you can adjust the output from like 2 volts, 2.5 volts to like 40 volts. It has a display on it, so it displays the input voltage or output voltage depending on what you select. You can turn off the display. You can adjust it with this potentiometer here. I added a 10,000 microfarad cap to the input, a 35 volt cap, so basically we're limiting the input to 35 volts with this cap, but I'm not going to crank it that fast. And there's a little diode here to keep the voltage from going back into the motor and trying to drive the motor when you stop cranking. So let me demonstrate this thing next. Okay, so I have the display set up so it'll display input voltage. So the voltage you're creating with the generator going into this cap, and it's going to measure that and display it on the display. So let me pick it up and crank it. So it's barely cranking it around. It generates 13, 14, 15 volts. And then I'm going to switch it to the output voltage, which I have regulating at 5 volts because I'm feeding it to this micro USB connector. Alright, next thing I'm going to do is hook it up to a battery bank, cell phone charging battery bank, and try and charge it. It'll definitely load this motor down. Right now it's not loaded down at all because there's no output current. So let me do that next. So here I have a Amazon Basics 3 amp hour battery bank. Let me start cranking this and you can see what it does under load. So you can see the little red light flashing on the Amazon battery bank. That means it's charging. And you can definitely hear the motor under load. And you can see the regulator is only getting to like 3.7 volts because that battery bank is yanking the voltage down on the output because I'm not cranking it fast enough to overcome the current needs of the battery bank right now. But it's charging the battery bank. It's pretty tough to crank this thing. Oh, let me show you the crank and how I made it. So the crank's made out of these M8 60mm bolts, and what I did is I drilled a hole that's a little bit larger than the output shaft of the gearhead, and then I drilled another hole into the side of the bolt head, and then tapped it for this 440 screw, stainless steel screw that I have in here, and that's what I used to set it on the flat of the gearhead motor here. There's a flat on it right there. So you put the handle on there and you crank the screw down until it sets on the flat. And I just took a piece of scrap aluminum. I had 1/8 inch thick aluminum and cut it on the bandsaw so it's about 3/4 of an inch thick or wide. And then I made it about 6 inches long. And then I just took some 608ZZ bearings and put them on here to make a nice handle to crank against, so your hand just grabs onto the bearings and cranks. Kind of neat. It works. I think I want to scale it up. I have a different motor that I bought. Oh, let me warn you, because this is the second one that I had to build with this gearhead. I thought I would see how fast I could crank the thing. Let me take this one apart and show you what happened. So these are all Metal Gear gear heads, but they're not very high quality gears. So what happens when you crank too fast is you put too much torque into the gear head here, and what happens is, if you can see this, I don't know if you can see this, you can strip the teeth right off of the gear. So I was trying to crank the thing as fast as I possibly could, and it just tore the teeth right off of that gear. So only mild cranking, no excessive cranking on these. So or buy a better gear head motor. These were fairly cheap, cheap Chinese ones. So guess you get what you pay for. But I found on eBay last week, and I bought all three of them. They had some Crouzet French gear head motors, which DigiKey had them for about 400 bucks a piece, but the guy was selling these used for 16 bucks a piece. So that's what I want to make my next hand crank generator out of. It'll be a little bit beefier hand crank generator. So I'll do that next. So this is the Crouzet gear head motor that I found on eBay for 16 bucks. The guy had three of them, and I bought all three of them. But I think this will make a really nice hand crank generator. It's pretty beefy, pretty stout. I actually used one of them on the ball mill on the revision 2. So we'll cover that again in another video, but this one will make the next hand crank generator out of. I'll have to put some material on the lathe and make it better crank handle for this, because this is almost an 8mm shaft on this thing. So alright, well, thanks for watching, and I'm going to go back to the shop and try and make a crank for this, and see you next time.